Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. Our conversation today is going to be around why representation matters, why Indigenous representation matters. Thank you all for signing up. We're all in a virtual world trying to do the very best that we can. So I appreciate that you're all here today. I just ask that everybody takes this time to really reflect and make sure that we're entering into this space with a good heart and a good mind. We're going to do the very best that we can. Today is going to look a little bit different than we had originally planned, but that's okay. The good news is we'll have some information that we can get out to you after this conversation. But first, I want to start off by introducing my co-host with me, Robert Pilot, who's part of Native Roots Radio, who I want to send a special shout out to, who's hosting this event in this awesome format, because I'm sure we're all really tired of just sitting and looking at Zoom screens. So we're going to try our best to make this as interactive and engaging as we can. We are streaming live on Facebook. I see that we have a pretty good number of participants. And so as you're there, if there's some things that come up today that you either want to ask a question or make a comment or share some information, please do that. Make sure you check that feed, because some people might be sharing some really good websites or information along the way. So Pilamae for being here. Robert, do you want to do an intro on Native Roots Radio and let everybody know about the format in which we're using today?
Ahu Pinigigi, Ahu Ho-Chunk Raja, Wakunja Hade, Hinga Dana. My name's Robert Pilot, and I just told you that my native name, which is my real name, not my taxpayer name, is Distant Thunder. And I'm really excited to be partnering with you, Heather. And we got a lot of people watching right now. So I'm really excited to get with your people here and talk about these issues. And this is a really exciting, and thank you for inviting us, Native Roots Radio Network, along with this ride. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I want to go back and kind of talk about why we decided to do this Lunch and Learn. As many of you know, November is Native American Heritage Month. And it's just an opportunity for us to create an educational conversation. Just because it's November doesn't mean this is the only time or the only day we should be invested in learning and understanding and celebrating our Indigenous history and our present being. A lot of times we talk about the history piece, but we're still here. We're still here. We're still thriving, and we're still doing a lot of amazing things. And so to me, education is something that's been extremely important to me in the work that I've done. And so this event today is partnered with NDSU, M-State, MSUM, Fargo Indian Education, Moorhead Indian Education. So it's a lot of our education pillars in this community coming together to provide this information for you. I want to also say that this is very much a starting conversation. There is going to be a call to action at the end of this. And so we're going to hope that everybody who's involved really leaves today with some tools, some inspiration, and some excitement to go out and get some things done. We're going to turn it over, because our host today, our academic host, is M-State. We're going to turn it over to Carrie Brimhall, the president of M-State, for a short welcome. Thank you all for being here.
Welcome. My name is Carrie Brimhall, and I'm the proud president of Minnesota State Community and Technical College, with campuses in Detroit Lakes, Fergus Falls, Moorhead, and Wadena. When asked what Native American people called North America before Columbus arrived, noted scholar Vine Deloria Jr. simply replied, "Ours." As we begin this event for Native American Heritage Month, I would like to acknowledge that the campuses and communities that M-State serves occupy the traditional lands of the Dakota, Lakota, Anishinaabe, and Ojibwe nations. Today and every day, we pay respect to elders both past and present, and we remain steadfast in our recognition of their contributions to our state and nation. I'm thrilled to be here with you today, and there aren't many things I know for sure right now, but I'm certain we cannot leave conversations, celebration of identities, or inclusion and belonging initiatives to chance. At M-State, one of our 3 organizational values is inclusion. We welcome, respect, and accept people for who they are, and celebrate the power of our collective differences in creating and shaping more robust, energized communities. I am grateful for the team of people who put this together and the students who are willing to share their stories. To our Native and Indigenous friends, colleagues, and community members, I want you to hear that we see you. You are not something else. You are beautiful, brave, and resilient, and your identities are celebrated. I hope that we can continue to work toward true belonging, defined by Brené Brown. True belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Thank you for joining us for this event. Be well.
Awesome. So we're ready to get started. So I am going to be really transparent in this conversation with all of you. The original plan was for us to we did some amazing interviews with some of our students in our community from all three of our campuses. And it's really important that our student voices are heard in a powerful way. And so I think what we're going to do, just to kind of give you all some more bang for your buck, is that we're going to have a panel discussion this hour, and then we'll send out a video of those students and their conversations to the people who had registered for this event. And we'll also share it maybe for the next week or so on all of our Facebook pages. But I really wanted to take this time to make sure that we can have an interactive conversation. I want to welcome our panelists. Everybody's busy. Everybody has a lot of things to do, but these phenomenal women are here to help us all grow and learn. So we'll start. I'll just introduce everybody, and then we'll go around, and if each of you want to do a further introduction, tell us your tribal affiliation, what you do in the communities, and then we'll get going. So we have Melody Staebner. We have Annie Lafreniere Ritchie and Winnie Lindstrom. And so I'm going to go around and we'll have each of them do an introduction. And we are watching the comments in the live feed. And I do want to go back and just make a little bit of a clarification. I know I just did an umbrella funding conversation or sponsorship, but I want to make sure that we recognize the departments in which, so it's NDSU Office of Teaching and Learning is the campus or the program that helps sponsor this, and MSUM Office of Diversity and Inclusion and Interdisciplinary Center for Diversity and Inclusion as well. So let's start. Winnie, do you want to do a quick introduction for us?
Sure. Uju Badasi Gateway Minowa Winnie Lindstrom Indigenous Cause Magazine Dodem Galbabigani Kagan Donjiba. Hello everybody. You can call me Winnie. I am from White Earth and I grew up on the White Earth Reservation. I am currently a PhD student at the U of M Twin Cities in epidemiology. And I'm my research focuses on Indigenous health, and missing and murder Indigenous women and social determinants of health. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
I'm so glad that you're here, and I appreciate your work that you do because it's just so valued and so needed. Annie, do you want to go next?
Anin Buju, Nin Annie Indigenous Cause, Gawa Babiganaka, Gandunchaba, Ajija Kandudem. I too, like Winnie, am from White Earth. However, I did grow up on the Fond du Lac Reservation, so that's where my home is. So I currently serve as the West Central Minnesota Safe Harbor Regional Navigator, which provides training and technical assistance for youth who are at risk who have been sexually exploited, or who have been sex trafficked. I am also a board member for Mending the Sacred Hoop Coalition, as well as for the Indigenous Association in Fargo-Moorhead.
And Melody Staebner, go ahead. You're muted, Melody.
All right. Bonjour, Zugapan Vanessa Kwe Indigo. My name is Melody Staebner, and my Indian name is Snowbird Woman. I'm enrolled in the Turtle Mountain Reservation. Pretty much grew up here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. I coordinate the Indian Education Program for Fargo and West Fargo School District, and I'm currently also a proud student over at M-State.
When I told y'all we had a powerhouse panel. I wasn't lying, right? So I guess I'll do a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Heather Keeler. I'm an enrolled member of the Yankton Sioux Tribe, which is the Hunktawan Nation down in South Dakota with lineage to Eastern Shoshone. Currently, I'm the Assistant Director for Multicultural Recruitment over at NDSU. So my goal is to always do outreach into our underserved populations. I've spent many years in areas of healthcare and education, both K-12 and higher ed. And so this conversation is really a personal passion of mine. So I'm really glad to host this conversation because I think representation matters. For me, when I grew up, and I'm sure I'm not alone, that, you know, when I would go to the doctor or when I would go to school or when I would go other places in the community, I just didn't see people who looked like me. And subliminally, that always told me that I just didn't belong in those places. When we look at our numbers and we look at research, you know, we know that we don't have the same graduation rates. We know that, you know, only 7% of Indigenous populations even hold a master's, you know, and so we know that the statistic tells us that there's not many of us there. But what does that do for students? What does that do to our Indigenous youth? What does that do? And how can that, if we change that visual, what does that also do for our non-Indigenous students and everybody else within our systems? And so let's get started. Are you ladies ready? Yeah, we were born ready, right? So one of the things that we talk about is curriculum. And when we grow up, you know, when we're as early as kindergarten, right? Like we sit and there's this misconception of what history is on our land. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously Thanksgiving, with that around the corner. And we always sit down and it's like, oh, Pilgrims and Indians, you know, we sit together and we're this happy family. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. And so I think that we need to have curriculum that really represents the true history. Melody, I'm going to start with you because of your role. If you want to talk a little bit about why you feel that's important and some of the examples that maybe you're doing within Indian education and on the North Dakota side.
Well, students who learn about our Native American culture are usually taught the bare minimum, and it's not usually a comprehensive approach to teaching about our Native American culture and history. So, and we know that when they're seeing themselves in the curriculum and they're being taught, you know, about something relevant to them, they're going to be able to learn a lot better, having that background knowledge of, you know, of what they're being taught. So some efforts that are going on in like surrounding states, we have Montana has Indian Education for All. There is efforts in South Dakota. It's what the Wolakota project. And then I know Minnesota has a Native American curriculum framework. And then in 2015, North Dakota started the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings. And so we've been in our third year now educating teachers and training them in the curriculum. And that way they could apply these lessons, right? They're readily available and they could apply it within their classrooms. So some of the things that they learn about is our sacred relatives, learning and storytelling, sharing and generosity, sense of humor, tribal policies, treaties and sovereignty, Native contributions, and Native identity. And when the teachers first start, you know, they're not real confident in teaching about Native American culture. You know, for one, I think, you know, they don't want to offend and teach the wrong thing. And, you know, that's what we're doing is we're working with them to have more confidence in teaching about Native American culture and history. So far, we've had 68 teachers in the last 3 years go through the training. 17 of those teachers have taken the class 2 times. So it's been really exciting to see, you know, how these teachers have gained confidence, that are creating their own lessons, that are applying it to their, you know, what they're already teaching in their classrooms. They're making these lessons their own. So they have been very excited, you know, to return to the class, to share the lessons that they've created. So it's not mandatory though in North Dakota. It's a conversation that keeps coming up, you know, amongst administrators and people, you know, parents. But one thing that we're working with currently is we're having conversations with our parent committee. So is to look at what's being taught already in the schools, what's being taught in social studies, but to look at accurate Native American history and making sure that those things are incorporated into what teachers are already teaching. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Let's go to Winnie, just to kind of hear your take on this a little bit. Curriculum and why it's so important that we're hearing the truth from K-12 all the way up into higher ed as well.
Yeah, I think for me, the importance is for Indigenous students to hear about themselves and also for non-Indigenous students to know about us. When I went to undergrad, I met people who thought Native people were extinct, who weren't from Minnesota and just like had never been in contact with a Native person before. And so it's really hard when you meet somebody and they just think that you don't exist or that everything about you is from the past. And I think that we have such a rich history and base of knowledge that I think for our wisdom to be in curriculum makes the most sense, because it's a great basis for many future things. It allows us to feel pride in ourselves and know that we have helped get to this like modern time. I think a lot of people often put our traditions and our knowledge in the past, and it's like quirky things to know, which it's not true. We have medicines that could be helping a lot of people in our own places, like our own reservations and stuff that aren't being taught. And I think that that's a real problem. And just on like an academic research sense, like Melody was just saying, is that when we're not learning about ourselves, it's a big deficit to us in the long run.
Yeah, that sense of pride is huge. And when we see ourselves in places, like you're bound to increase pride. I think we also have to remember that we're still here. We're very present, but also we're not stuck on reservations. Almost 60% of the Indigenous population lives off the reservation in urban areas. And so it's not just about teaching students the Indigenous history on tribal lands. It's about doing it everywhere. I want to head over to Robert. So more than just doing Native Roots Radio, he is also an educator. And we talk a lot in the conversations that him and I have had. We talk a lot about representation and why that matters in different areas like education, healthcare, politics, different things like that. So Robert, what's your frame of this and some input that you have?
Well, first of all, whenever I see the lieutenant governor, I thank the lieutenant governor for looking like my students, because in St. Paul, I have an all-native homeroom. And one of the things I would like to add too is that we had so many years and generations of colonization. I really think everybody needs to be educated, not just the non-native people, but even our own students need to be. I'm almost 60 years old, and in 1978 was the year I was a junior in high school, and that was the first year that we could legally practice our own religion. So I have grandparents and great-grandparents, Gagas, and Chokas that couldn't vote, couldn't do their own religion, and so there's a 2-generational gap at least of our own people, our own students, their parents that really need this too, to be re-educated. Like when things like lateral violence happen, that's not our way. We were taught long time ago to bring everybody in the circle, and so we need to keep that in mind, and we need to when we move forward, because my students need to know who they are too, and to be proud of that. And I think whenever I see Lieutenant Governor, and now I see Heather Keeler being elected as state representative, I say Pinigigi, because this brings us closer to that. When we see, and someone else mentioned today, when we see people that look like ourselves out in front, educated, and that it's okay, it's not colonized, because we're catching up and we are putting ourselves into the game. Look at all the numbers of natives that came across Turtle Island that did something to this last election. They changed this election. If you look at the numbers of who voted for who, and in the deep north in Minnesota, we had almost 10,000 new Native American people registered to vote for the first time. That's a game changer. We're in the game, and we got to tell our students and tell everybody that we're in the game, and we have a seat at the table. And if we don't, I heard this a long time ago from an American Indian movement lady. She said, if we don't have a table at a seat at the table, we bring our folding chair and we pull it up. And so I go by that. So I just went on a little tangent, but we need to reach out to our own people and re-educate our own people about our ways, whatever tribe you're from, because I know some things are a little different in Ho Chunk because we're better than all you guys. But I didn't say that. You know, we all have somewhat similar teachings, but we also have different teachings too. And so, Heather, thank you for stepping up and running for office and making us proud, but also my students be able to see people that look like them in power. And that's a huge, huge deal in education.
Yeah, thanks. When you were talking about
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. There's no questions. It's not, I feel like everybody's like confirming if they've answered the questions. You're all doing great. It's just having a conversation and sharing this information. But it's interesting that you say, like, if we don't have a seat at the table, like create the seat, or, you know, bring our powwow blanket and save that space, because it's not even just for us. It's about this opportunity to create what our next generation can see and what they can become. Annie, I'm going to switch up the conversation a little bit, and we'll start with you. But when we talk about representation in curriculum, that's one thing. But when we also talk about it, like just visibly being able to see people who look like us, I think that for me, I've gone back to this space where human trafficking, murdered and missing Indigenous women, that there's this difference in respect level. You know, as an Indigenous woman, I go out into this world and feel, you know, very different than other people. The safety things that we have to go through just to walk around in the dark to our car is very, very different. But give me your input and your feelings on, like, if we start to see more Indigenous people in areas of leadership, does that change this respect level? And does that start to change some sort of conversation that we can have around safety and making sure that our women and our Indigenous relatives are safer on this land?
I think so. And so honestly, much of my expertise and experience is more particularly around risk and prevention. So I see that representation as absolutely showing Native youth that we're capable of anything, and really seeing the beauty and the strength and resilience in our culture, and then also really reclaiming our power. So absolutely, that impacts our safety and well-being, but it also impacts our self-image and who we see ourselves as and how we see ourselves, right? So, and we know, I shouldn't say we, so I participated in the Human Trafficking Leadership Academy's cohort number 5, where we conducted research and recommendations for the federal government, particularly around how culture can be used as a protective factor against human trafficking among Indigenous youth. And we really saw across the board, it is that representation. It is seeing ourselves and other folks that look like us, that have had similar experiences to us, and who can teach us more about our culture. So that's a huge thing in impacting trafficking and exploitation.
Yeah, you bring up a good point too, is I feel like it's a weird space to have conversations in education about human trafficking and about those signs. I remember when I worked in Indian education, you know, we would talk about something as simple as, like, if we knew a girl, in Indian education is an amazing program. Melody, I'm going to come to you next in this, is that we have the opportunity to build relationships with students and families over an extended period of time. You know, I worked with students from grade 7 all the way up to 12. And so you start to see changes in their habits and their demeanors. But it's as simple as like, okay, are they wearing more makeup and more lipstick and carrying bags that maybe that family hasn't ever had before? And like, what are those signs, and how do we build close enough relationships to really step in and have those conversations? But back to the representation piece, when we physically see people, I think there's a trust factor there, that when you see somebody who looks like you trust in them a little bit more. You share conversations deeper. You could maybe share that you were scared of something because you feel like that person is going to understand that a little bit more. Melody, do you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and how people maybe open up differently to people who look like you and have shared experiences, and how it's schools and representation are creating safe spaces as well?
Okay. Well, in our program with Indian Education, we do a lot of grassroots work. So we're building relationships with our families and our students, and we go do a lot of home visits to try to connect them to resources within our community, helping to bridge the gap between school and home. And we attend meetings with them. There is a different level of trust with our families. A lot of families that we work with, I've noticed there's a mistrust, for social services, for education, and rightfully so. But we go in there and we really try to help kind of mend those relationships and help families feel comfortable coming to school meetings, trying to get them involved. And we have also helped others within our school district to get into the home. And that's where, we've been invited into homes, and, we've been around this community, one of my staff and myself, we've been around the community for so long that you find out who's related to who, and we find out how many families we're related to. And, we are one big family. And so it is there is a lot of trust, that we build with our families to be able to help them and talk about some of the tough things that they're dealing with, a lot of the challenges. And I remember, I could think back like 10 years ago, I remember going to a meeting with a parent in the school, and I don't know if I said 2 words in the meeting, but after I left the meeting, and this, they just kept thanking me. Thank you so much for being here, because they really felt like somebody was listening to them, because I was a part of the district, that the school district heard what they had to say. And that always stuck with me, that, that's how much our families, really value having a Native American staff and somebody there to help and support them.
Yeah, it's a scary world out there when you feel like you're alone. And I think that we've all probably experienced that, walking into classrooms, walking into hospitals, walking into universities, and not seeing anybody who looks like you, is a really sad feeling. And so it is really important that staff like Melody are there. But like, at what point is it going to be more than just our Indian Ed staff? When is it going to be more teachers? When are we going to see an administration that looks like us? When are we going to see professors, teaching chemistry? Like it's not, we get stuck in a box of like, well, yeah, we have Native Americans in Indian education, but we need more than that. We need to see our principals look like us. We need to see presidents of our universities look like us. So I want to kind of shift the hat a little bit to students. Winnie, I'm going to start with you. As you've gone through your academic life, how many Indigenous leaders have you had, either as teachers, as principals, along your K-12 and higher ed journey? And if you've had them, how has that relationship been different for you?
Yeah, I guess I'll start even just with like my elementary through high school. So in White Earth, we do have a BIA, like White Earth Reservation School, but most people, and it's different now, but when I was growing up, most people would deter their children from going there because the idea was that it was less than, and that the education there was worse than our school that was in the border town next to us. And so a lot of us ended up busing to the 2 towns near us. And so even just that like beginning idea that like education on our reservation is already worse than the town next to us. And then from there in our school, although about almost half of the population was Native, we really had, not until high school, we had one Ojibwe teacher, and then we had the like Indian ed where people who couldn't stay in class would go to. And so beyond that, we didn't really have anybody that presented as Native or was a part of our community, which was really hard. And just thinking back, I remember one experience that will stay with me forever. In ninth grade, they made us like try to map out our classes in order to help us get into college to do something that we wanted to do. And I met with the counselor. It was the counselor, me, and my mom. And I told him that I wanted to be a lawyer. And he said, well, maybe you should think about something more realistic, like a law clerk. And thankfully, my mom was not there for that, because my initial thought was like, oh, okay, yeah. And my mom thankfully shut it down and was like, why would you say that to her? She's coming to you with something that she hopes to do in the future. And so thankfully, I had my mom in that position to protect me. But I know that there are many students that didn't have that. And then in my undergraduate, I went to the University of Minnesota Morris, which used to be a boarding school. And so Native students who go there get a tuition waiver. However, there's a lot of misinformation around that tuition waiver. And so you would often run into non-natives, predominantly white students, that were angry about our tuition waiver, which had nothing to do with their financial aid packages. And so as a student group, we took it upon ourselves to do education around this waiver, which ended up being supported by the administration, but should have been done by them. As students, that's not something that we should have had to take on. And so luckily there, that because of the waiver, there's almost about 13 to 14% of the population identify as natives. And so I felt like I had a very lucky undergrad experience because I got to be surrounded by people like myself, and there were faculty members there. And so it was really nice to see. And then to continue that, I did my master's at the University of Hawaii, and I have a Master of Public Health that focuses on Native Hawaiian and Indigenous health. And so I have to say that speaking about representation was a whole different thing for me, because there's a lot more Native Hawaiians that are visible. It was the first time for me to live in a location that wasn't predominantly white. And so I think that 2 years of my life was one of the most pride-inducing moments, even though I'm not Hawaiian. To be around other Indigenous people that have such pride and such visibility in their own nation was just amazing. I was allowed to work with an immersion school there, and so all of their teachers Kanaka Maoli, so they speak Hawaiian, and all of the students speak Hawaiian. And to see their joy and just connection with their teachers was something that I had never experienced before. So I know that it's true, and I've been to other immersion schools here in Minnesota, and you can see that there's a difference and more of a connection with people between their students, their family members, and the teachers and the administration. So I would say, just to sum it all up, that I feel like I've been very lucky because I've had role models along the way that have shown me that I can do these things. Like in my program, specifically for my master's, there were 2 Native women that ran that portion of the program. And so that was a big change when I started my PhD, because at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, the majority of the staff are white. A lot of them are male. We have one Native professor in the whole School of Public Health, or one person that is outwardly expresses that they're Native, I should say. And then beyond that, even people of color, I think that we have 3 Black females and maybe 1 Asian American. And so being in this university is a lot harder. I'll often be in classrooms and be the only brown person, not even just the only Native person. I'll be the only brown person in a room. I took a class on children who have had incarcerated parents, and I was the only student in the room that had actually had a parent that had been incarcerated. And so the entire class, it just felt like everybody was discussing me and like I was the other, and that these were these white saviors that wanted to learn about this topic so that they could go into a community and figure it out. And I've had many experiences like that. And so being in a health field, it's oftentimes all you see is our negative statistics. Which is really hard to do, even as a grown adult, to sit there and constantly be berated by our negative statistics, or the fact that we're not even a statistic because they didn't interview enough people. And to be in a classroom of people who think that like, oh, I'm just coming to save you. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we do have a lot of that, right? Like this space of like, will people learn about us, and then all of a sudden like they want to fix everything, and like I'll tell you, the biggest fix is to let us come to the let us come to the table, let us be part of the change in the conversation. Like we've been working on this our whole entire life. Robert, I know you had something you wanted to follow up with on this. Go ahead.
Wow, I have a lot of things to say. I think one of the things as being an educator and remembering that educators have a tendency to really go to the people that really need help or really amplify the superstars. And so we have 80% of our community that maybe like I was a late bloomer. I'm still blooming now at 60, but I mean, we have to be aware, excuse me, we have to be aware of all our students and all our community, because for many years, teaching for 25 years, we've only talked about going to college, college, college. And what I need and would love to see is we talk a little bit more, bricklayers make $40 an hour, from the get-go, and you don't have a big student loan or whatever. We have to meet everybody where they're at. And I know it's easy to work with the superstars and easy to work with and really want to dig in there and help people. I had a homeroom 2 years ago where, I'm fun and funny and my native homeroom, and I had 4 girls in there that were kind of turned off. And one of them, as we dig deeper, one of them's mother kissed him goodnight, and her and her 2 siblings goodnight, and hung herself. One of them's mother was in jail. One of their 2 of the mothers was in jail, and 2 of them OD'd, and are not there for our kids. So back to, we need as adults, and I'm throwing this out to just adults too, is we need to be in the community for our people. And we can't, watch powwows online and things. We need to be there. People think I've been around forever because I go to stuff. I'm part of the community, and I haven't been around forever. I just want to give a shout out to my wife who's white, and she worked in the medical field until just recently. She was a pharmacist at the University of Minnesota. All she had to do was mention that her husband, she asked the person, if it was a native person, what tribe are you from? My husband's Ho-Chunk, and it knocked down all the walls. And we need our allies to know how to speak to us. And I think somebody talked a little bit about, we don't need the white saviors. We need allies. And I think that's an educational thing forever. I can't say that enough, because we really appreciate our help, people's help, but we're a small portion of the population, which I believe we're a bigger part of the population, especially if we went to the 1 drop rule, blood drop rule. But I just think we need to strengthen ourselves. And I think we're on what I like to call, and my new show is going to be called, the Native Wave, because I think we are really waking up, and it all started with Standing Rock. And then before that, it started with Wounded Knee and American Indian Movement with all their survival schools. We need to think outside the box. We need a school within a school. Whenever we have education, we need to protect and support everybody in our circle. And I think that's what gets me up in the morning and makes me emotional right now. But I think we can do it. We just have to show up. I'm giving people, not just our panel, but everybody, our cousins, my daughters, everybody has to show up and support our Native students, our Native kids, our Native young adults that may be lost, that are going to come back and be late bloomers like me. So thank you for having me on this. I didn't realize how much I had to say.
Well, thanks for joining and wearing like the best t-shirt in your whole closet. Okay, Melody, I want to come over to you because you're a student. So we've been talking to you with the hat on of being like in Indian education, but let's move to the other hat of you being a student over at M State, which I'm so proud of you and our community is so proud of you. I know that. But let's talk about your journey through education, as growing up K-12, or even let's go like preschool, pre-K, K-12, higher ed. Have you had a lot of representation, in your journey through education?
I don't remember having any Native American teachers or, any Native American role models, I guess, up until probably middle school, high school. And that's when I got to know the Indian education coordinator. That was before me in the Fargo Public Schools. And she was very encouraging, with going to college and she was there and helped me through some difficult times in my life, as I was growing up. Um, and much like a lot of our Native American families, I was very work and family oriented. Right after high school, I got married right out of high school, started a family, didn't feel like it was the right time to go to college because I wanted to raise my children and felt the need to work at the time, to make ends meet. And, now having been in my job now for the past 18 years, I'm going to school, at M State. I did attempt college, actually after my second child, but I ended up dropping out, within a week or two of starting, and I felt too overwhelmed. And, so here I am, an older than average student, in college, but, I'm always learning, and, this is exciting for me. And, I just hope that I could be an example to other, people within our community that, it's not too late to go to school. And, I want to lead by example for my children as well, and, hope that and encourage them to go to college. I'm the first out of 5 kids in my family that have graduated high school and now going on to college. So it is exciting. We do learn from, our households, that we grow up in. And there was a lot of things that I didn't think I would do. I shared with Heather that I used to be one of the shyest kids in school, barely looking up from my shoes. And I never thought I would drive because my mom didn't drive. And so there were, a lot of things. I didn't think I would graduate high school. I didn't have a vision for, a future, as I was growing up through middle school and high school. I didn't think about, tomorrow. It was more of a matter of survival. And, here I am and, working with a lot of the students that, are struggling and hoping to encourage them that they can, be the makers of their own, journey and path in life, and that they can, be in this place too. And, one request that we do get quite a bit is for role models. We have a lot of parents that are like, do you have any male role models? Do you have any, they want role models for their kids, but, so that's something we're always trying to connect, students with. And, unfortunately, a lot of the times we end up connecting them to, male role models or somebody else that isn't Native American, within our community, but trying to do what we can. And so it is important for our students to see us in these professional fields and going to college, that way they can see what they can be as well.
You are a great example, that's for sure. I do believe that we have to lead by example. I mean, some of us, we can say it and we can say it, but a lot of it is that, it takes a lot of courage to step out and change something in your life. And going back to school is a really scary thing for people. I know for me it was, when I went back, and it really was like the Office of Diversity and Inclusion that saved me when it came to education, because I've never had a Native American teacher or professor in K-12, in higher ed, through grad school. Like, I've never had that. And so I want to go to Annie, but I want to keep in mind that we have a little bit over 10 minutes left, but we're going to move into this portion because I think that often we have like, that was a really good conversation. Thanks for being eye-opening, but we're going to challenge. We have 108 viewers right now. We're going to challenge each of you. This is a call to action. We don't want to just keep having conversations and like spending our lunch hour and feeling like we were part of something great. Like, we have to do more. We have to do, the work out there. And so, Annie, I want to send it over to you to talk about, you do a lot of work in the community and you do a lot of trainings and you do a lot of outreach. What are some examples that you can share that you've either seen in communities that work really well, partnerships that maybe can be created, or just some like ideas that nobody's ever tried before?
So I'm not super creative on ideas that people haven't tried before, but things that I have seen that work really well is just creating spaces for Native kids to gather and also have access to Native adults who are successful, whatever their background is. And especially, I think it's super important for Native kids to see Native adults who have overcome struggles and have still come out to a place where they're doing well, where they're taking care of themselves, where they're taking care of their kids or grandkids, so that they can see themselves in that. Creating that space, accommodating for that. Oh gosh, there's so many different things. But I feel like that's a really great start.
Space is so important. And it's something that I feel like when you guys watch the video that we'll share out of students that we interviewed, every single student talks about needing a space to go where they can connect with people who looked like them. And I want to like say that, and if you're white in North Dakota, Minnesota, everywhere you go, you see people who look like you. That's a privilege. That's a sense of comfort. That's like, you see people who look like you everywhere. As an Indigenous female, a lot of times in the world, I have to seek out the people who look like me. I have to go find those pockets of people. And so if you're on a university or you work within an education system, like, be an advocate and be an ally to create those spaces. We talk a lot about inclusion. We talk about caring about diversity and making sure that people feel like they belong. But if they don't have a space to seek out and build those relationships with people who look like them and come from the same background and go through the same struggles, they're not going to succeed at the same rate. So one thing I do want to hit on, because I've seen it in the chats, is this idea of like, well, how do we do trainings? I don't know. A lot of people have done like safe zone trainings, right? And we get the sticker that shows the rainbow. So as LGBTQ students are walking around different campuses or around your office, and if you have that sticker, it's an indication that I see you. I've taken the steps to better understand you. And over at MSUM, there was a group of individuals who worked really hard to create what's called the NSSN, which is the Native Student Support Network. And it was a training that our faculty went through, and we really talked and listened to student stories. We shared policy and procedure as far as like, if students are feeling bullied or harassed, what does that process look like? If you feel like you're not having your needs met to be successful, what does that look like? And we did that for 4 years. And the really cool part about it is we had stickers made that had a feather, an eagle feather on it. And we all know that, like, for Indigenous students, if you walk around and saw a sticker on a door that had an eagle feather on it, that would be an indication that, like, well, that's kind of cool. Like, what did they do? And so I'm going to challenge everybody in your own space, wherever you work, wherever you're from, whatever community capacity you're in, start doing trainings like that. Start reaching out. There's a lot of people in this community who can help launch that stuff and provide that stuff, and really get involved in some of those areas. And it does matter. And the students need that. They need to know that they matter enough that y'all are taking extra time to care about them. But don't stop here. Please don't stop here at 1 o'clock when we get off this space. Don't stop at the end of November just because it's the end of Native American Heritage Month. We have to have these conversations in our community continuously. I do want to say, I think one piece that we need to highlight is the fact that representation matters, but sometimes your visual of what you think an Indigenous person looks very different. Not all of us are that stereotypical, dark hair, brown eyes, brown skin. When it comes to blood quantum and blood degrees within individuals, like we all just look very different. So making that assumption and knowing that you can look in your classroom and see Native Americans and then you respond differently should never be the case. You should always respond and talk about the Indigenous population because we're in your classrooms. And so I don't know if somebody wants to very quickly touch on blood quantum, because I feel like when we have these conversations, that's one of the top things. It's like, well, some people don't identify as Native because they're not eligible for enrollment. So I'm going to does anybody want to, do I see any? Robert says no, he's not going there. Who wants to?
Oh, I'll go there. I just blood quantum is a colonization to get rid of us. Period. In African American, if you're African American, you have a 1-drop rule. That's to keep African Americans in check. So, to keep an eye on them and who they were. And so I really have an issue of the colonized feeling of we have to do something. Red Lake did something when it came to blood quantum. They changed their blood quantum, and we have to, because people my age and older in 10 years are not going to be around, and we're not going to have anybody enrolled. And then we fall right into the place where the government wants us, is gone, and take our land and put pipelines wherever they want. So no, this is a hot button for me.
Yeah, and I think go ahead, Annie.
I was just going to add too, is that Native identity really is a political power too. And so of course they want to remove Native identity from us because they're taking away our political power. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
and I come to that too. With funding, we're always dealing with 506 forms. For our funding stream for our program with Title VI, and so it's also, we serve all Native Americans that identify as Native American, but we can only receive funding for the ones that fill out a 506 form, which has a tribal enrollment number on
I was going
Exactly.
to say the same thing, that funding, especially when you look at scholarships. So, if you sit on scholarship committees or you're looking at how you're supporting Indigenous students as they transition from high school into higher ed, like we're kind of in a population that a lot of our Indigenous students aren't enrolled members of their federally recognized tribe, because again, it's mathematical genocide, as it says right there. So making sure that some of those policies are looked at too, like don't hold it so strong to having to be enrolled members of tribes. Like tribal nations will provide documentation that show lineage or descent. And really, like, do you have to prove that you're Irish? Do you know what I mean? Or like, we're the same as dogs and horses when it comes to blood quantum. And that again dehumanizes us, and it's a system that continues to work against us, because the goal was to create this system where we just happen to disappear, and we're still very much here. So we have 4 minutes left. If everybody just wants to do a quick wrap up, we are not ending here. I want everybody at this time to go follow Native Roots Radio, because what Robert does and the information that he shares on a very regular basis are conversations just like this. So many people say, like, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, how do I get involved? One, show up to the powwows, show up to the events, show up and help, show up and learn. But then also engage. So you want to show up and you want to engage. And Native Roots Radio is an amazing way around a lot of conversations. We've talked to the women of Wounded Knee. We've talked, around hemp. We've talked about all kinds of things that matter to Indigenous populations. So let's wrap up and do ending comments. Winnie, you can go first.
Going back to our call to action, I think that one simple thing that everybody can and should do is make sure that we're providing compliments and positive affirmations to our Native youth. One of the biggest things that affects us is our historical trauma. and the way that we're treated, which in a psychology term can lead to learned helplessness, where it brings you down so much that you get told that you can't do little things all the time, that you think that you can't make any sort of movement out of your situation. And so one thing that I make sure I always do with my nieces is every time I see them, I compliment them on something that they're doing, their intelligence, something, their skill at something, just so that they understand that they're amazing just being here. And I think that it's something that we can all do inside the classroom, outside the classroom.
That's great. And also like recognizing that we're more than just Indigenous people. We're doctors, we're politicians, we're so much more than just that. Annie, do you want to go next?
I think I would just like echo that, making space, and then also connecting youth to people who are involved in culture, and those people exist in literally every community. You may not know them, but somebody else in your community will know them. So reaching out to folks who know, reaching out to us, making sure that our youth are connected with people who practice culture.
All right, Melody, go ahead. And then Robert, you can follow Melody.
Okay. Well, I would also say, again, showing up, there are things, within our communities that, cultural events and things that even maybe your local Indian education program will do, to have our teachers, them to be able to see their teachers at these events and to show that their teachers are taking an interest goes a long ways with our kids. Another thing would be role models. If there's anybody out there that has time, you're Native American, there's definitely a real need for role models for some of our youth. And then also another thing for educators is just to never expect Native kids in the class to know about their culture, because we're always learning more and more. So I always kind of relate myself to this like spectrum, of like urban Indians and the traditional Native American. I would have kind of started more down here, but I think as I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm listening to my elders and people, I feel like I'm moving down that spectrum. So I'm learning more as I go along.
Wow, this has been an awesome meeting in Zoom. Thank you, Heather, for doing this, and thank you, ladies, for showing up in a good way. There's so much in my mind. I think one of the things that we should do and really do and talk about immediately is to get a network of people for our students, and then also vet them out, because we also have a lot of trauma and people that may not be good for our students that are in the community. And it's taken me a long time to figure out who's who in that spectrum, but there's people that do know. And so with trying to keep this in a good way, I think call to action would be a network of people in every state and every city in this country who can reach out to our young Native men and women and students. I think that's something we can do immediately.
Yeah, those are all great. I think too, we have to remember that our role models are community members. I think that, the systems have always taught us that we're not good enough or somebody else would do that better. And we really have to find the confidence and the beauty in each of us. If you I think people think they just need to be more than what they are to be a good role model. And I think Annie said, like, we also need to have role models that have overcome some struggle in their life and can really be honest about that. It's not all glitter, smile, and roses, throughout our lives. And we need to have role models that can really share their journey and their success through some of those things as well. It's not always our people who have master's degrees or doctorates or, it's community members, and you're out there. We see you, we know you, it's the moms and the dads and the parents that just show up every day to work hard and provide something for their children. Those things really, really do matter. So we're gonna end it. This was great. I feel like we can always, every time we get into these situations, we could just keep going. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe we keep coming back and providing these conversations. We still have almost 100 people on. And so give us a like, give us a love on this. If there's things that you thought were really valuable at the end of every single conversation I'd like to ask, did you learn something new today? Did you learn something new before you came in? Because education is a lifelong opportunity, and we all have to challenge ourselves to grow. Growing pains are not comfortable. And so sometimes everybody needs to get out of their comfort zone to really create a change, because I do believe that people in this community and in this region want to help encourage our Indigenous students to be successful. So thank you everybody for coming. Thanks panelists for joining. We will share the video of the students and their interviews. Please watch that. Please take the time to listen to what our students are saying and what they're telling you that they need. Take this information back. We'll keep it up live on the page for probably about a week. So if you had to miss pieces or you want to share this with other people, please do that. But as always in this time, be kind. Open the door for opportunity for your Indigenous individuals to step up for leadership. You'll be really surprised what they might bring to the table. So thank you all, and we'll see you all later. Robert, did you have something?
We need to resist, divest, join a group, run for office.
Yay. That was great. You have a shirt that says that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.